we catch a drug dealer, death penalty. That's it.
This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy.
Then, in an
case. Therefore, the court finds that the sentence of death is the appropriate penalty the court should impose for the murder of 9-year-old Felicia.
When it comes to death penalty, yes, I believe in the death penalty. And we had the death penalty here for years now in California.
Tonight to say that you would support lowering the capital punishment age for juveniles from 17?
I would seriously consider a bill down to 14 years old. I don't think it would pass the Supreme Court.
Capital punishment, also known as the death penalty, is a legal procedure where a person is purposefully put to death as a retribution for a real or imagined crime after a legal investigation has been conducted to determine whether they are guilty of a crime. So, death penalty is basically taking a life of a person who has committed this horrible crime. Capital punishment was practiced as public execution by British Empire as a form of crime control strategy. When European settlers migrated to the New World, aka American continents, in search of new homes, they brought this practice along with them. The first known death penalty was held in year 1608 in the Jamestown colony of Virginia, when the man named Captain George Kendall was executed for being a spy of Spain. During the colonial era, we have seen death penalty being served for even the minor of crimes, as killing of chickens, trading with Indians, stealing, striking your parents, etc. On crime and punishment, an essay written by Cesare Barcera in the year 1767 changed an outlook of the world on capital punishment and gave a fuel to abolishment of death penalty movement. As the essay stated, there is no justification of states taking of life. Influenced by the essay, US President at the time, Thomas Jefferson, attempted a reform of death penalty laws by limiting it to only murders and treasons. His bill was defeated by only one vote. The United States has been playing a tug of war throughout the history ever since, and still, to this day, hasn't settled on what is the right practice. On this video, I will evaluate an effectiveness of capital punishment by comparing the US states with and without capital punishment as their crime control strategy, and its influence on crime rate throughout the history of our nation. My goal here is to prove that death penalty is not an effective form of crime control strategy and even goes against our Constitution. Argument for and against death penalty started gaining popularity when Dr. Benjamin Rush, founder of Pennsylvania Prison Society, challenged the flawed concept that death penalty serves as deterrent. Probably the most frequently used justification of death penalty is deterrence. The basic concept of this theory is that a considerable proportion of people will stop from executing a horrible crime they had otherwise planned simply because they fear being executed in the future. In 1834, Pennsylvania became the first state to ban public execution, and Michigan was the first state to abolish capital punishment altogether in 1846. Some of the recent arguments on pro-death penalty are as follows. Charles Simmons, on his article, "The Death Penalty is Appropriate," argues that death penalty serves three legitimate purposes in society. General deterrence conveys to those considering horrible crimes that they should not do so because they risk receiving a death sentence. Specific deterrence means that the individual who receives the death penalty won't be around to murder more people. Retribution is a manifestation of society's right to pass moral judgment by holding the wrongdoer accountable to punishments appropriate to the offense he or she has done. An article by Michael Summers in the Wall Street Journal, "Capital Punishment Works," states that in average, there are typically 74 fewer murders the year after the execution. Using the information from publicly accessible FBI sources, The study looked at the relationship between the number of executions and the number of murders in the United States from 26-year period between 1979 and 2004. When executions rise, murders fall, and when they fall, murders rise. There seemed to be an evident negative correlation. President George W. Bush, in his year 2000's debate with Al Gore, also said, "I don't think you should support death penalty to seek revenge." I don't think that's right. I think the reason to support the death penalty is because it saves other people's lives. Despite the immense evidence in support of death penalty, I personally discourage it. My first reason being that it goes against our 8th Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishments. Death penalty is both cruel and unusual. According to my research on the topic, I found that death penalty is not a good way of deterring crimes either. A survey by New York Times suggests that homicide rates in death penalty states has always been higher compared to non-death penalty states by a huge margin. According to the Times, half of the states that practice death sentence have homicide rates above the national average compared to 10 of the 12 states that do not. Homicide rates in the state with the death sentence have been 48% to 101% higher than in state without it during the past 20-year period. Data fetched from deathpenaltyinfo.org from year 1990 to 2019 shows a trend that if more capital punishments were given, crime rates subsided following year. However, crime rates of states without death penalty also subsided at the same time, so this data is not useful for explaining the drop in crime rates. Since the 1980s, states are slowly moving away from handling death penalties, limiting it to only most heinous of crimes, such as mass murders and serial killings. At the same time, crime rates have dropped significantly. It is very complicated to explain what fueled this change, but most common explanation is growing employment rate and better job opportunities. The soundness of the economy is, in my mind, the most crucial single component, as the numerous employment we have created as a result have truly reached far down the social scale. As a result, many people, especially young men, who until 1990s were probably completely out of the labor force, are now being drawn into it. While they may not be getting the best of the jobs, they are still getting jobs that are legal and give them a sense of being a part of a legitimate economy. They are employed in jobs that keep them off the streets, which are hazardous for both themselves and those around them. Jobs also keep them out of bars and the drug trade, among other things. There have been a significant improvement in those people's lives. When we look at the data from pbs.org, we will notice how crime rates greatly subsided due to the boost in employment and not because of the capital punishment handed to the criminals. I also compared the murder rates of 5 states, New Mexico, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, before and after 10 years of abolishment of capital punishment, but no significant change was noticed. It could simply be because the data was too small. It could also be because these states were already progressive enough to not hand any capital punishment even when the option was available, thus didn't appeal to the public opinion on crime and punishment. So it made no difference in murder rates. I would like to introduce an unpopular theory to link between decreasing capital punishment contribution to lowering crime rates. Researchers conducted an experiment with mice and limited food supply. Group of mice were cased in a box with a device that would give mice an electric shock when touched. When mouse first touched the device, it received a mild pain through shock and stayed away from it for a couple of hours. Scarcity of food made the mouse more curious and in the process tried to touch the device, receiving mild shock. Over time, it was noticed that mice weren't bothered by the shock delivered from the device while on a lookout for food. Things changed when mice were fed well. they touched the device less frequently, and their dislike for the device grew even more. We can loosely use this study to start an argument against the system that considers capital punishment a form of crime deterring method. Shock device has a similarity to capital punishment or any other negative implications to crime. When we have an abundance of resources or jobs, we would move away from committing crimes and focus on gathering these resources. This shows us how capital punishment is ineffective to helping crime rates go down, and we must look into more positive reinforcements. Something that states with capital punishment does poor is policing and worse funding of law enforcement compared to states without capital punishment, which supports an effectiveness of broken window theory. There is an inversely proportional trend in states with higher execution per capita rate to police and correctional spending per state. For example, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, and Alabama ranks 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th in death penalty rate. It also respectively ranks 30th, 23rd, 35th, and 38th in police funding. This couldn't be mere coincidence, right? It is a sign that the states are simply eliminating things that they are unable to solve. Therefore, we must stop capital punishment. As I mentioned before, broken window theory could be an effective and productive form of lowering capital punishment. In the 1990s, implementation of broken window greatly helped reduce crimes in most of the cities. Different variations of such methods must be implemented in order to reduce and control crime, while also focusing on better awareness and funding in correctional facilities. Providing incentive of life and help by the state and the federal government could shed light on faulty practice of capital punishment and may give a new life to citizens. Hence, capital punishment is ineffective to reduce crime rates, and we must look elsewhere for an answer.